All right, now, ladies. So for today's class, we're going to look at Spanish anti-slavery movement. So we have been looking last Friday, we look at the French. Today we're going to look at the Spanish. The British is very much different from the Spanish and the French, as you would have seen, right? And so we're going to look at the what was the movement like in the Spanish territory. I can tell you from the outset that it was very, very different. And I'm hoping that you are reading because reading is very important at this stage. All right, so let us list some of the French colonies, please. French colonies in the Caribbean. Sorry, the
Rangers,
Spanish
Spanish,
colonies,
sorry.
the Spanish.
Oh,
Spanish colonies.
Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
Uh, Cuba.
Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico, yes, Cuba, Puerto Rico. So these are some of the colonies. Remember that originally all of these lands were originally owned by the Spanish. All of these lands were owned by the Spanish, and then the French, the English came, then the French, then the Dutch, everybody came and took over.
Excuse me,
Go ahead, Tommy.
you include Venezuela or is only like in not the mainland, the islands?
Just for the territories, the islands.
Okay, sir.
So we are looking at this, and remember, look at it, the Spanish West Indies. The Spanish West Indies colonies would be Cuba, Santo Domingo, which is right here, and Puerto Rico. These are the territories for the Spanish. And the Spanish colonies were a little different from the British and the French in that they're it seems as if the Spanish didn't want to end slavery. It seems as if they just never wanted to end slavery. And so in 1791, one of the things that they did in 1791 was to reduce the duties on imported Africans. And by 1807, they abolished the British would have abolished the slave trade. Just like the French, as we would have looked last week, where we saw the French, the British trying to encourage all the European countries to abolish slavery, the slave trade. In 1817, the British is going to sign an agreement with Spain, just like how they would have signed a similar agreement with the French. And so this agreement said that they would abolish the slave trade, right? That is what Spain said. All right, Britain, you're pressuring us. We agree in principle that effective May the 20th, the Spanish would ban the introduction of new Africans into our territories or colonies, right? So that is what she would have agreed to by May 1820. When May 1820 comes, it was the same thing. They still continue to import Africans into the colonies. They really they didn't care, right? Just like the French, they really never really, it was, they just never care. And so by 1820, they continued to import Africans in there. In fact, the number of Africans would have increased significantly. And the Spanish played a very blind eye to the importation of Africans, even though they said that May 1820, that would be the end when they would have end the system of slavery. Now, by 1835, the Spanish government enforced a procedure where they search and seize ships. So any ships, just to please the British, any ships that had Africans on it that were involved in the slave trade, they said, we are going to seize those ships. We're going to search and we're going to seize. The truth and in fact, they did to some, but they played a blind eye to many of them. Now let us look at 1845. 1845, the Spanish again, can remember here, ladies, in 1817, they would have signed an agreement with Britain to say that by May 1820, they would stop the importation of Africans. By 1845, they enact the law to say that they are going to abolish the slave trade in the Spanish colonies. However, between 1830 and 1850, over 100,000 new Africans arrived annually, and this is Cuba now. So you can just imagine what is taking place in Santo Domingo, which is Dominican Republic, and in Puerto Rico. And so in Cuba, we have 100,000 new Africans arriving annually. Between 1856 and 1860, 90,000 Africans arrived. So what we're seeing here is that although they passed a law to abolish the slave trade, it continued. All right? It continued.
Yes,
Still continued. Nothing changed. And they believe that they are a law unto themselves. The Spanish never cared, to be honest. Now, by 1848, the planters criticized Spain for binding to British anti-slavery and anti-slave trade propaganda. So the planters in Cuba, Puerto Rico, Santo Domingo, by 1848, they said, listen, you need to stop follow the British and their anti-slave trade propaganda. Stop follow what they are doing. We are Spanish, we do things differently. Our culture is different. In fact, we are benefiting from the British abolishing the slave trade. By 1848, they said they would have abolished slavery 10 years ago. We are benefiting because they abolished the slave trade. Look how our economy is blooming. Look how our sugar industry is blooming, right? However, Spain wanted to appease our international partners, which is Britain and France, because by 1848, the French would have abolished slavery. And so many argued, many of the planters in Cuba, especially in Cuba, they argued that they wanted to be annexed to the United States. So that is one of the things that they said. They said, since Spain, you are banning to British propaganda that slavery and the slave trade is wrong. We are still continuing the slave trade even though we passed the law. And we are not going to follow the French and we're not going to follow the British when it comes to the slave trade. So listen, we want to be a part of the United States. This was the Cubans now. In 1848, the Cubans want to be annexed. They wanted to be a colony of the United States. Why did they want to be annexed to the United States? Question, why did the Cubans wanted to be annexed to the United States?
sir, was it because they placed the ban on them, or was that after?
1848. This is the period we are looking at. 1848. Why do you believe that the Cubans wanted to be annexed to the United States at this time? Remember, the discussion is about slavery.
Sir, is it because the United States were just coming to the Caribbean, sir, and they didn't want to follow the abolition laws, sir?
They were against, to some extent. Anyone else? Why do
Sir,
you
Sir,
believe?
can I try?
Go ahead.
sir.
Sir, would it be because at this time Spain and Cuba weren't really getting along? Like, even though, like, the tension between Spain and Cuba was building up, and the United States was helping Cuba out in many ways, which they looked at as a way. They looked at the United States as their savior in a way, so they wanted to be annexed to them instead of staying under Spain's rule.
All right. Yes,
Sir.
you are correct. That answer part of the question. Bartley, you have something to say?
Sir, is it because like you remember the thing with the British and the United States where they were fighting and they wanted their freedom and they got their freedom, and this Cuba already said they're not listening to this British, and it looked like Spain was trying to coincide with the British, so they're like, you know what, since United States already get their freedom from whatever, we can go to United States and adding to what the girl before me just said.
Mr. Hall.
Go ahead for me, please.
Oh, sir, I was saying that they wanted to be annexed to the United States as a way of gaining political and economic freedom while still trying to maintain slavery.
They want, yes, so that is correct. They wanted to maintain slavery. Now, all the answers all of the responses are correct. But what I was looking for was that right in 1848, when the Cubans wanted to be annexed to the United States at this point still had slavery and the slave trade. Slavery was still going on in the United States. You see, right now, the United States pretend as if they are the epitome of human rights. When the British Caribbean, we in the British Caribbean or the English speaking Caribbean, we were way ahead of the United States when it comes to the discussion of slavery. We would have ended slavery here in the Caribbean before the United States. Even when it comes to the 1960s, when Rosa Parks and all of them have to, in the United States, had to stop, had the segregation law when it comes to sitting on bus and all of these different stuff, and segregation when it comes to school. We in the British Caribbean or the English speaking Caribbean at this time, we didn't have that problem. And so in 1848, the planters, they wanted their economic freedom and they also wanted their political freedom from Spain. And at the same time, they also wanted to be annexed to the United States because slavery and the slave trade was still going on in the United States. And as you can see, this flag here is a Confederate flag. And in the US, they abolished slavery in 1863. Slavery was abolished in 1863. Now, the northern state wanted slavery to end. Those in the north and those in the south wanted slavery to continue. And so the South wanted to leave the Union. All the states in the South wanted to leave the Union. And the North said, you're not going to leave the Union. We are going to declare war and we are going to force you back into the Union. And as a result of this, ladies, they had the US Civil War that took place. As a result of the US Civil War and slavery coming to an end in the United States, then the Cubans going to change their perspective. Instead of the Cubans saying we want to be annexed to the United States, the Cubans are going to say that we need to be independent from Spain. So they are now pushing the idea of independence from Spain. Go ahead for me, Barclay.
Oh no, sir. I was just going to ask if this happened, if this is what they call the Confederate War, and if this was what happened between when I think Abraham Lincoln was president.
This was part of the Confederate War. Yes, you are correct. Which is also called the US Civil War. Now, once they leave the Union, ladies, this was the flag that those who supported slavery created this flag. This was the flag that they would have created. And in 2020, during President Trump's campaign for a re-election, most of his supporters were seen with this flag. Go ahead for me, please.
Sir, didn't they lose that war though? The South, didn't they lose the war?
Yes, that's why they are part of the United States today, because they lost the war. They lost the war, and that's one of the reasons why they are part of the US today. And so once the US made a decision
Yes, sir.
and said, go ahead.
Sir,
South of the US.
them
What
racist.
about
You
the
were
South?
in and out, sir.
Oh, repeat what you said.
Sir, I was asking you what South you were talking about.
Oh, I'm saying that the South would have
Want-
lost, the South lost the war because the South wanted slavery to continue and the North wanted to end slavery.
So, sir, that's why the South in United States so stays so now.
Racist, very
From
good.
time.
And so now, after the Cubans realized that the South lost the war and all of these different stuff, then they are going to say that, listen, we can't say that we want to be annexed to the United States. What we're going to do now is that we need to declare ourselves independence. And so many colonists, they did not support Spain. And Carlos Manuel de Espuedes, he freed his slave and declared war on Spain in 1868. So between 1868 and 1878, they fought a war against Spain. Those in the colony fought a war against Spain for 10 years. The truth is that the colonists did not have the military might. And so at the end of the war, they signed the Treaty of Zangon. And the treaty said that Spain remained in control of Cuba. That was what the treaty stated. And so if we were enslaved people who fought on the side of the colonists, then you are going to be freed. Not all slaves going to be freed, only some slave is going to be freed. And if you fought the war on the side of Spain, then you are going to be freed. Because the enslaved people were on both sides. Some enslaved persons didn't take any side and they didn't participate in the war, and because of that, they remained enslaved people. Ladies, it's always good to take a side. Now, by 1870, the Spanish is going to pass a law to free all enslaved Africans over the age of 70, and by 1886, they are going to abolish slavery in Cuba and Puerto Rico. That is because by this time, I believe Dominica Republic would have advanced to their independence. All right. Now, this British versus the Spanish emancipation. Some of the things that we need to take into consideration is that they had no compensation, no amelioration and apprenticeship system, as you can see, no major anti-slavery society. So while you had anti-slavery society for the French and anti-slavery societies for the British, there were no anti-slavery society for the Spanish. This was, and also their slavery, the end of slavery was linked to their independence, the Cuban independence. Reasons for the abolition of slavery in 1886. International pressure. They had international pressure from British, the French, and by the 1860s, the United States joined the campaign, right? And once the United States emancipated their enslaved people, the Spain felt isolated. Spain felt isolated. And another reason was that by 1886, the planters in Cuba started to have a lot of indentured workers, servants. And so they started to get workers from Mexico, China, the Canary Islands. And if they have the workers, then they are going to have no problem with abolishing the system of, they are not going to have a problem with abolishing slavery, because they are now having workers coming in from Mexico, China, and the Canary Islands. Another thing is that there was a rise of nationalism taking place in Cuba. And notice that we are speaking directly of Cuba because it seems as if the people in Puerto Rico were very docile. Let's say, all right, Spain, do whatever you want to do. Just like what they are doing today with the Americans. The Americans take control of them and they say, America, do whatever you want to do. Right? Very docile. And so there's a rise of nationalism taking place in Cuba. And so they wanted to be separate from Spain. And they disagree with Spain on several issues. Things like they didn't want to continue as a colony. They disagree with Spain taxing them. And so slavery was linked to the independence movement. And we know for sure that they would have fought a war to gain their independence. They didn't gain their independence at the end of the 10 Years' War, but we know for sure by the end of the 10 Years' War, some enslaved people would have received their freedom through the Treaty of Zangon. But slavery, and this was 1878, and slavery actually ended in the Spanish colonies in 1886. So we know for sure, and then Spanish emancipation is nothing much that we can discuss about, because the truth and in fact, they didn't have any major anti-slavery movement going on in Spain, like what happened in Britain and what happened in France. Yes, I believe Lawrence. Go ahead for me, Lawrence. You're breaking up.
I was saying that
We're not hearing you. All right, now listen up now, students. So for tomorrow's class, we're not going to meet. You're going to meet in your group. to do the comparison between the British, the French, and the Spanish emancipation movements. And on Thursday, we are going to have the presentation. So Emin's group, I'm going to ask you to present your 2 presentations on Thursday. All right? Enjoy the rest of the day.
You too, sir.
All right. Go through the PowerPoint for me, please. Go ahead.
Sir, my Wi-Fi was giving trouble. But I was saying that the law in 1870 was called the Moral.
Yeah. All right. Wi-Fi giving issue. Let us pray the Wi-Fi get better. All right, everyone. Adios.
Oh my God.